somebody who's, cabinet or just sub-cabinet level, and that person may well go on television in the next few days to defend the administration, may get asked about this op-ed, and will say, I've never seen anything that could possibly justify somebody saying such a horrible thing about the president. If you're willing to write this in private and say that stuff in public, you got to ask yourself whether, about the integrity of your own oath of office.
That Ben's point there about what's so maddening about this moment in so many ways is every reporter in the White House says, we hear this all the time. Everyone on Capitol Hill that comes on this program says, off the record, they all say it. They all know it. They say the same thing about this president. They sound more critical of him than, the biggest.
This question, so that we're talking about the question of his fitness to firm. Not only that, why aren't we actually then thinking about how the Mueller investigation, which is fundamental to our democracy, we stop
opportunity to get back in his good graces, and they're going to do it by inflaming his anger about this whole situation.
Well, that's why, Rick, this is as counterproductive as I can imagine. If you're saying the man is unhinged and we're trying to keep him on, in the guardrails, this doesn't help.
No, this was a person, whoever deep state throat is, this is a person who's trying to ensure that they get to come out of this later and say, oh, well, I was concerned. I expressed my worries. I tried to keep him in the guardrails. I was one of the ones who tried to do the right thing. And I'm sorry, that's not going to work in the short term or the long term. Trump will not trust anyone in the White House right now at all. And I think McKay's exactly right. He's going to go back to all the bad old guys, and Steve Bannon's going to land on his Nazgul on the White House lawn tomorrow and take over again, and Trump's going to indulge in all this wild, paranoid kookiness. You talk about a witch hunt. He's about to execute one there with everything but ladies up on a pile of lumber. It's going to get nuts in the White House. It's going to be glorious and yet terrifying.
Well, Betsy, there's also the fact that the timing of this feels like it's written by a person who thinks
really signed on to this type of argument. But now we're increasingly seeing people who are closer and closer to Trump who think more the way he does. People like John Bolton who are just more comfortable with the Trump.
You want to say something?
Yeah, I think one of the things here is, I said this yesterday before this letter came out, is that essentially a lot of the White House staff have invoked the 25th Amendment. They just didn't bother to tell us. And they've been trying to bound Donald Trump's behavior and trying to keep him from some of the wilder excesses. But Betsy's exactly right. The people that could check him, the people that could put the choke collar on Donald Trump, that number is shrinking all the time. And so I think that whoever wrote this is acting in some ways because they recognize that we're reaching a bunch of different inflection points. The Woodward book is one thing that's going to keep playing out and playing out and playing out. And as the Mueller investigation gets closer and closer, and as a lot of the legal arguments on the Trump side seem more and more flimsy, he's going to get more nervous, more reckless, more dangerous. And I think that whoever wrote this is looking for a footnote in history to say, well, I warned you guys. I tried to stop it, but I couldn't. And I tried to help, but I couldn't. And I think, again, Trump's behavior now is going to be even more egregious and more reckless and more crazed.
Well, I feel torn, as I think a lot of people do, about what to do with the president's tweets and how seriously to take them. And, but the president, basically told the New York Times to hand over someone for national security purposes. The Times must, for national security, turn him or her over to the government at once. That's not going to happen because we live in America, thank God. But, that's frankly authoritarian sort of language. And,
shocker.
and McKay, there's one thing here I think that's important. When they talk about the bright spots, there's one point the author uses the term free minds, free markets for free people, which I always thought was adorable. What are you talking about? This seems to me an attempt to launder out conservatism as understood by a certain strain of professional Republicans in Washington who want to say Donald Trump was never of us, and when whatever comes out, we're going to put this in the ash heap. Having spent a lot of time reporting with legal experts and having them on the show and talking to them, widely consensus view is that the Nixon precedent is that you can subpoena a president.
Yes, exactly. Well, that's about the tapes, but yes, that you can subpoena the tapes. And again, it was just unsettling that we didn't get answers on those types of questions that were so important that we all outlined in our opening statements. I'd say the second thing, which just hasn't gotten enough attention, I really focused on some of the consumer cases. The fact that he had been overruled by the D.C. Circuit. All of these judges had overruled him when he said the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau should be unconstitutional. A bureau that, of course, had brought $12 billion back to consumers for fraudulent mortgages and loans. And he said it was the headless fourth branch of government. And it did have a head, as you know, and her name was Elizabeth Warren. But that is what he did. He then also declared that the net neutrality rules were unconstitutional, something that, again, set up to protect consumers, even playing field. So I went through a series of those to show this pattern where he really did have extreme views when it came to consumer issues. And that should be very unsettling as you look at someone for the Supreme Court.
On that CFPB case, because it's interesting, it came before the D.C. Circuit. He writes the dissent, right? I mean, the other right. Folks in the D.C. Circuit say, of course, this is duly constituted. There's statutory and constitutional authority.
Including Republican-appointed judges who said that they literally said, well, if you say that, then what happens to the FTC? Or how about the Social Security Administration that actually only has one head, just like the Consumer Protection Financial Bureau? So there's real problems with this decision and his opinion in the dissent outside of the actual Consumer Protection Financial Bureau.
Does the sort of madness of what's happening around you get to you on Capitol Hill on a day like today? I mean, you've got the Woodward book. No, it's an honest question. You got the Woodward book. You get this op-ed drops, and I wonder, saying that the president's completely unfit for office. We're trying to keep him on the guardrails, and you're up there, doing your constitutional duty of advising and consent. Like, what is how do you process that?
Well, first of all, you have a duty, you have a job, so you focus on what you can do and what you can do best. Obviously, right now we're trying to get as many documents as we can because the White House is basically holding them up, shielding them, and we're trying to make as many as we can public. But beyond that, what really bothers me about what's going on right now, Chris, is that we should be governing from opportunity, right? We are at a stable moment in the economy, and we should be doing things like immigration reform, doing something about farmer prices, but instead we're in one crisis after another. And certainly this anonymous letter to the New York Times, this op-ed, has put the White House in another crisis of their own doing. But that is one of the things that really bothers me, and I figure that just as the Supreme Court, I said, should be a ballast in turbulent times, and you want a justice that would be like that, who's a check and balance, right now we have to be that ballast in turbulent times.
What do you expect tomorrow, another day of questions? We have seen Kavanaugh practice the routine that has been well worn. He didn't even answer today, which I thought was interesting, because the president pardoned himself, which he said was a hypothetical. It never occurred to him, and people have been talking about it for months, obviously. What's the approach tomorrow?
You're going to see more of a focus on executive power, just because we haven't gotten the answers, and there's a lot of other articles and there's a lot of other cases we can focus on there. You're going to see we are pushing for these documents to be made public. I hope we will see a number of those documents be made public tomorrow. Right now, we just have the documents I asked for, the campaign finance documents, which for some reason were singled out. And by the way, they're a treasure trove when it comes to campaign finance, because he actually says that he believes this back in 2002, that the campaign finance limits appear unconstitutional to him. So imagine if we had those kinds of documents from the White House. So I think you're going to see more push on campaign finance, more push on the executive power, and of course all of these arguments and cases and things where he has views that are way off the mainstream. And we have to make that case given the composition of the court right now.
All right. Senator Amy Klobuchar, who was in that hearing room today, is standing outside of it now, is headed back as the hearings continue. I do appreciate you ducking out for a few minutes.
Thank you, Chris.
All right, let's bring in journalist Erin Carmon, co-author of Notorious RBG, about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Ellie Honig, who's a former assistant U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York, and Dahlia Litwick, senior editor at Slate, who has covered the Supreme Court for years. What did you think about today's hearings?
I thought that there's this spectacle that is almost unwatchable of protesters, largely women, screaming about their bodies, being dragged out as men talk about women's bodies in the abstract. And it is just the sort of weird counterbalance of men talking about being mentors and girls basketball coaches and earnestly how much they love women, while actual women are being screaming, dragged from the room. Is just, the optics are like nothing I've ever seen before.
Well, and it's because, one of the subtext here is that Roe is in peril, in dire peril. Today, which has been obvious.
Yeah.
And none of the Republicans, funnily enough, on the committee want to talk about Roe or talk about abortion, as far as I can tell.
Yeah, you had some, sort of nods to it where they talked about how some precedents must be so bad, such as Dred Scott, that they must be overturned. But, of course, the only people who are really asking about it are the Democrats on the committee,
which itself is a tell.
Of which there are women. And there were some important moments in which we got some clarity, in particular vis-a-vis Roe v. Wade.
This was literally a D.C. judge reaching in a case of in this position, almost powerless young woman who is pregnant, who wants to exercise her constitutional right in bodily autonomy to get an abortion, and is stopped by the person who runs the immigration detention under Health and Human Services, who himself is an ardent anti-abortion.
Yes, Scott Lloyd, who has said that he is like a foster parent to these young people in detention. And as we know, there are more young people in detention than there used to be thanks to the Trump administration. And there are multiple people who are seeking to exercise their right to end their pregnancies. And basically what happened was that the Trump administration did everything they could, short of dragging this woman out of the abortion clinic. This girl who said she had been raped, who was 8 weeks pregnant when she went through all of the processes. But again, every single week that she did not get the abortion, the risks increased. And again, we've been hearing Brett Kavanaugh, carpool dad, Brett Kavanaugh, advocate for women. And that's wonderful that he advocates for the women that clerk for him. But in terms of the real-life consequences on this young woman who was in immigration detention and under the thumb of the federal government, all of a sudden it was, I invented this new hoop for her to jump through just to kind of run out the clock to the legal limit in Texas, which is only 5 weeks away.
He was also in the dissent on that. He was overruled by his other colleagues in the D.C. Circuit. Ellie, I thought that stuff on executive power today was interesting because it seemed like that. I guess I don't know the strategy, right? So at one level, you don't want to tie yourself down to anything. And that I kind of get. But it also seems like there were some pretty easy softballs given to him on executive power.
And nobody is able to hold up this op-ed and say, let me just read into the record.
Made pretty clear he would flip that if he
in the House and Senate, one chair who's chosen by the 10 members of the body that would be able to make recommendations in the event that the president is unable to discharge the powers and duties of office. Now, the 25th Amendment was adopted in 1967 in the wake of the Kennedy assassination, and a lot of concern about different succession crises that could take place and about the stability of the office. And so it's nothing for anybody to get freaked out about. And it'd be great if we could remove this from the realm of tabloid reality TV to constitutional law and transparent governmental process. And so all the bill does is say the Section 4 of the 25th Amendment says that there are two ways you can activate it. One is if the vice president and a majority of the cabinet say the president is having problems discharging the powers and duties of office, or the vice president and a majority of a body set up by Congress. And when I first got elected, I called over to the Library of Congress to say, where's the body that was set up? And the call came back and they said they never set the body up. So in 50 years, the body was never set up to oversee presidential capacity, and that's all we're doing. The legislation doesn't even mention Donald Trump by name. Obviously, his situation is increasing interest in our dealing with this problem, but we need to have a process in place so we can break the glass in event of emergency.
So there would be 5 members of this body, 5 Republicans, 5 Democrats, and under the Constitution and under the language of the 25th Amendment, they, along with the vice president, could initiate the removal proceedings.
Correct, but Congress itself would have to act. And if you read the very dense and elongated provisions that are in Section 4 of the 25th Amendment, you'll see that ultimately Congress would have to act, which means it always has to be bicameral and it always has to be bipartisan. And ultimately, if